Welcome everyone. We are so glad you are here. Welcome to Beyond the Box. It's such a pleasure to having all of you. For those who don't know me, my name is Monica Kang, the founder and CEO of InnovatorsBox, and I'm so excited to welcome you to Beyond the Box. I really wanted to just highlight how excited I am for today. I think this particular past few months, just really thinking about what it means to be Asian American, what it means to be, innovators. And I'm so honored because for those who have gotten a chance to join us before in some of these sessions, these are personal friends of mine who I just beg to say, I know you're super busy, but I know there's a lot of wisdom that you can share. And one of the things that you probably noticed previously, and you'll see again today, is that these are not just typical innovators who just go and build and, create impact, but also wonder, how do we do this from the heart? How do we do this in a way that we're deepening our leaderships and what it means to lead, what it means to innovate, and really think about that. And so as we celebrate Asian American Pacific Island Heritage Month, I'm so honored to invite some of my friends who are innovators who happen to be Asian American. So I want to take a moment to highlight, for those when I call your name, if you can wave so that way others get to see. We have Jennifer Hart, who'll be moderating us later on and guiding everyone through our journey together. We have Nish Parikh as well, who is going to be able to share from Ranga about how he is innovating and have been doing so for a while. We have Avani Parekh as well from Facebook, but also how she does really community building in a different way. Dr. Laura Emiko Soltis, if you can wave, at Freedom University in Georgia, really sharing about why I really need to think about human beings in a different aspects in education and its importance and many more. And Ian Suh in Boston, who'll be sharing a little bit more about his journey and his food business and many more. And with that, Jennifer, please take us away.
Hello. I am so thrilled to be here with all of you today. And let me tell you, this is an event that's close to my heart for so many reasons. And one of them is because it is organized by Monica, who recognizes intersections in a way that very few people do. And to me, this is important because when you think about it, the term AAPI is wonderfully inclusive, but it's also expansive, which makes it both rich and complex. And if there's one thing I want to emphasize, it's that we're not here to encapsulate the AAPI experience or a single AAPI experience, but to celebrate individual stories of wonderful innovators who, as Monica said, just happen to be Asian American on top of everything else that they do. And this can sometimes feel like a lot to unpack, especially if we take a moment to pause and think about all that's been happening in the United States over the past year. It's also a good time for us to reflect. How does my identity influence how I show up? But also, how do assumptions about who I am further impact how I'm showing up? And so with that, I would love to open with a lightning round type of question for all of our speakers. I'm going to ask Emiko, then Ian, Avani, and Nish to answer. How have identity in your environment shaped who you are today?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. Who are you in 2 minutes? I think, first and foremost, I'm an interpreter. Gloria Anzaltua, a Chicana feminist writer and feminist, calls this the Borderlands of Identities, what I want to talk about. Not from here nor there, not from one race or another. And I really feel at home around different people. And part of that is I'm biracial, meaning that I don't share my race with either one of my parents. My mom is Japanese and my dad is Slovakian American. And while I identify with both racial groups, I'm claimed by neither. So thanks for inviting me to AAPI Month discussions. I'm also multilingual, and I translate often across different languages. Nihongo ko hanasemasu, yo puedo hablar español, yo parlo un peu français, and I'm constantly translating even in my own head, and I'm constantly confused. I'm also between generations. You may have read this week, there's a new term for us who were born between 1981 and 1985, and that's a geriatric millennial. Welcome to the term. But that term was supposed to encapsulate how those born in those years can translate between Generation Xers, kind of analog Generation Xers, and digital Generation Z, right? And my environment, like everyone else, has really shaped who I am. And I also read a fascinating fact this week that the US Census Bureau reported that 72% of Americans live near where they were born or where they grew up. Let that sink in. And for me, I'm a transplant. I live more than 1,000 miles away from where I grew up in rural Minnesota. And thanks to really generous scholarships in college, I was fortunate enough to have visited or studied on 6 continents in 30 different countries. And I realized that immense privilege, unearned privilege of happening to be born in the US and being a US citizen by the random location of my birth. But as a result, my environment has always been around different people. And the people I love and the people I choose to be my family are very different from myself. Yes, my parents are different, but I was taught by white K through 12 educators. I got my political education from Mexican and Indigenous Mayan migrant farm workers. I got my graduate education primarily from Black feminists. And I'm constantly around different people. Every single partner I've had who I've loved and fought with and broken up with have all been people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds as me. And so I think, I feel really comfortable being around different people because that's all I've ever known. Unless you get this, Hafu, Hapa mix meetup, let me know when that's happening, but I'm rarely around people who share that identity. And, unknowingly, that really prepared me for the work I do at Freedom U, being around undocumented Black, undocumented Latinx, undocumented Asians, and creating a safe space for them to be human and be normal kids, but also help them engage in dialogue with Atlanta's African American community and other citizen communities here in Georgia in order to build their power, in order to secure their human rights, and ultimately to advance justice for immigrants of color here in the South. And looking back, being at the crossroads, being at those borderlands really prepared me for my work.
Wow. So many gems in what you said. But at this point, the only thing I want to say is I will gladly co-found the HAPA meetup group with you. I'm with you. All right, Ian, how about you? Thank you, Emiko.
Yes, I'll send my cousins over. They're all half as well. Thanks for the question, Jennifer. I'm still trying to figure out my identity. So still trying to figure it out. And thank you, Laura. Those were beautiful words. One thing I guess that was really helpful for me starting my business and running a large food truck restaurant business, I didn't know how hard it was going to be, but it all comes down to managing people. And in our industry, the turnover on average for a lot of businesses is 100%, sometimes 200%. So you could hire 2 people in a year for one position and they may all leave. And I think what really helped me from my upbringing was the emphasis on family. And so when I started a business, I took that emphasis on family into my company. And I think we have such a low turnover rate. In some quarters, some years, it's as low as like 5%. People just really love working for our companies because of that family culture I bring to that company. And it's very unique in the food industry. So that's one thing that I can say is definitely a piece of my identity that I carried over that was helpful. And it was, just thinking back how it started is just, simple things like having family dinners together. this is the one thing that we had the one rule. Well, we had a couple rules, which is no dating before college, come home before it's dark, and then make sure everybody has dinner together, you know, just to catch up on the day, just to spend quality time. You know, even if my dad came late from work, 9, 10 o'clock, we would all eat a snack and make sure we had dinner together. But that small tradition over years and years translated over to my business and made people feel welcome and made them feel like they're part of a family and it's not just work. And that translated them to treating our customers and the work that they do as a family and something that they connect more with beyond just making a hourly wage or beyond making food. It's a connection as well with the people and their craft.
Wow. Even more nuggets of wisdom there about how family does not have to be something that you are born into. It's something that you can create. On to you, Avani. How have identity and your environment shaped who you are?
This is such an interesting question for me because I'm a Southern Indian. I'm a first generation Indian American born in the Southern United States of the United States of America. And I very much love this concept of borderlands. I have always called it liminal space. Not enough of one thing to be that thing and not enough of the other thing to be that thing. And then you add in sort of a healthy dose of the racism of the 80s when I grew up, you know, in Charlotte, North Carolina. And as a kid being told to go home or go back to my country very much shaped this idea that I am an other. And that liminal space is like the only space for me. So it's really interesting to think about now in this moment, we have all these really beautiful terms like third culture kid and, you know, sort of exposure and being at the borderlands is something that is celebrated and actually serves us in our life, right? It's currency. It's something you can put on your resume. It's a way you can get a job. It's a way you can impress somebody at a party. And so we live in a different era, but one thing that I've learned is that as much as I want to assume, like for me, this is home. I live in California, but I'm in the home country where I was born, that I have made other places home just by virtue of the fact that it's so comfortable to exist as an other that you can make anything home when you have no identity. You have very strong identities and you have no identity. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about identity these days. And I think there's something I'm trying to promise myself is that like within the context of that otherness and that liminal space, I'm going to fill all of that space with as weird and wacky and half Indian and half American. I mean, whatever those sides of me are. There's some Kenyan in there. There's all kinds of stuff in there. There's definitely some Singaporean in there, but not the chicken rice that Ian serves, unfortunately. But Ian, I'm still going to eat your chicken rice. And so this is like this like a real, it's an opportunity to create like a delicious mix. And I'm here for that now. But I also realize that that's a privilege of being a woman in my 40s, you know? So I have moved on from, you know, so I think for women, like additional layer of this complexity for identity is that we have these phases of our life. There's maiden, and then there's, I think it's crone. So I think I'm in crone territory now, and crone territory affords you, because I'm in Gen X, it affords you to just really appreciate the wisdom that you've accumulated, and that feels really different from when I was young. And I didn't have an appreciation for the fact that I was just collecting life experiences and adding that onto my identity to fill this liminal space. So right now, having fun in this pink box. And if you ask me in 5 years, I might have a different answer for you, Jennifer, but that's where I stand regarding to my identity.
I love it. And, after I co-found the HAPA Club, I'm going to co-found the Gen X Club with you. How does that sound? Thank you, Avani. Oh, this concept of liminal space is really powerful. And I'd love to, I think, explore so much of what everyone has said. But for sure, last but definitely not least, I'd love to hear from you, Nish.
Sure. So I consider myself, I'm an empathetic social entrepreneur. And each word has some story, and I'll try to cover that within 2 minutes. So empathy is driven by my own personal experience facing challenges with learning abilities in school and college. Um, and also finding a job when I came to US. So some of those personal challenges has made me empathetic, and of course, I'm very sensitive, emotional. Sometimes as an entrepreneur, I feel like an emotional fool, but that's how empathy is really driving me to do the right thing. So that's empathy part. The entrepreneur part is, of course, it's driven by my we are all product of our environment, right? And the community we all live in. So coming from entrepreneurial family from India, and throughout my life I have seen my dad as an entrepreneur, so that has kind of driven me on that. But the most important part, my on my identity side, I would say, it's my social entrepreneurship, working on projects which has a societal impact, and that is truly driven by the family and friends and my wife Ethel, and some of the individuals I have met in my life, like Dr. Dale Cardwell. And he said, Nish, when our kids graduate, we all celebrate, and the special needs school graduation I'm coming from, parents are sitting in the parking lot and they're worried what is going to happen next week, Monday morning, when there is no school. And that's where that empathetic personality came out, and the curiosity, as Monica always talk about that, and that entrepreneurship spirit is really working towards making a societal impact. So that's how I feel who I am.
Wow. I am again just humbled by the heart and the head that I am in company with this evening. Thank you all so much for sharing that. And the common thread that I'm hearing in these highly personal stories is however much the world tried to create these artificial boxes, that each of you have found really unique and creative ways to reach out of those boxes, and not just reach out as in breaking out of the box, but really reaching for something and bringing people in. And that is very special. And yes, Avani, let's make our own boxes, every single one of us. Or reach out of the innovator's box. How does that sound? But of course, we've only just begun to dip into your stories. And Ian, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your business and how I'm sure it surprises a lot of people. And tell us how you came around to open a food truck, and what you serve, and what's important to you as an innovator when you think about the food that you're serving and the people you're serving.
Yeah, so I think you're alluding to it, but most people think I serve the Asian Hainanese chicken and rice. I actually serve halal style chicken and rice, even though I'm not Middle Eastern, obviously. But I think it's a fair assumption sometimes. There are more Chinese restaurants in America than McDonald's, Taco Bell, Wendy's combined. So I think that's just people's assumption. But I guess the beauty about business is when I started to think about what ideas I was going to do, I wasn't like, oh, I'm Asian, I should make Asian food. I was like, what is the best food that I have ever eaten that is not in Boston right now? And that's really how I thought about it. And that's how I came to choose this halal style of chicken and rice in New York. If anybody's been, it is wildly popular. And that's why I chose it.
I love the question that you asked, which is, what is a need that I can meet that is not currently being met? So building on that, Avani, I have a question for you, which is, did you actually think of yourself as an innovator? And if so, in what ways? And if not, what did it feel like to be called an innovator by Monica?
I love Monica, so whatever she calls me, I just accept without questioning. No, I don't necessarily think of myself as an innovator, and I think of myself as a weirdo personally, right? Like, and as I've sort of aged, the one thing that I'm realizing is I'm always looking for places that feel joyful and where I can shine a light on others who are making the world better in whatever way. You know, maybe they're innovators, maybe they're social entrepreneurs like Nish and Hethel, maybe they just light up a room when they walk in because of their presence. And so I found myself gravitating towards those spaces. And I think maybe at some point in time, I realized that not everybody does that. And I think if you're looking for the light, you will find yourself in spaces of innovation because it's only in the light where it can happen, right? Because we need to illuminate problems and find solutions to them. And that is like the essence of innovation. And I'm once again curious about how I'll feel about this. If my ego gets a little bit bigger, I might put that stamp on myself and add it to my LinkedIn bio, like innovator, creator, entrepreneur, speaker, TEDx. I might be one of those people, but I'm not quite there yet. But I find this question to be really fascinating because for me, the innovation in this moment has really been about rest. It's not about creating anything or doing anything. It's literally just about staying in one place and like listening, watching, and waiting, because the moment calls for me to observe and step back a little bit. And so I don't know if that's innovation or not, but the rest feels revolutionary.
I love the combination of serendipity and intentionality in what you said, which is sort of create the right environment and innovation will happen. You don't have to necessarily force it. And that is a really powerful reminder, I think, for those of us who struggle and think, wow, everyone's out there doing so many amazing things. What should I be doing? And I just wanted to say that's, I'm getting so many helpful tips already. And the next question is for you, Nish, because you work with an underserved population. You are not a member of this population per se. So as you talk about empathy, what challenges have both helped you and hurt you in terms of developing your own innovative muscles?
I think the empathy has been driving that passion and dedication to, as Avani said, look, think, analyze, understand. And in my case, because of, I think, my education background and my family background as an engineer, I've been building, making it and trying it out. So that's where, that's what has helped me. But the challenge is, in the world of innovation, and when you're working on any societal impact related change, it's very long journey. It's a slow process, right? And when it comes to hiring people with disability, people on the spectrum, there are programs where companies are working on these programs for years, 6, 7, 8 years, and they have hired 10, 20, 100, 150 people. So it's a slow process. So that I think that patience has also helped me. I'm a very patient person. So I'm not strictly cut and dry ROI kind of a person, because if I start looking at some of my work or my team work, that's ROI. In fact, when we start generating ROI, it will be double. One is in a financial term as well as a societal impact. But it takes time. So I think patience and all that has been very helpful as I'm going through this journey of something for of course the organization as an entrepreneur, but then also with the societal impact.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nish, because yeah, I think one of the things that is very hard to share with entrepreneurs and innovators is this idea of patience. It's always should have been done yesterday. And I think that is such a powerful reminder of the pairing of patience and empathy and what opens up when we do that.
But Jennifer, I do that with my team. I want it now. Let's do it right now. But in the back of my mind that it is going to take few weeks or months or years. So, but of course, as a leader, we have to get the best out of that particular moment. So I do that also.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because it is such a human reaction. And Emiko, I wanted to wrap up this section by asking you a question around empathy, because this has been a challenging year. And you deal with issues and people that have experienced trauma, challenges, uncertainty. How do you maintain empathy without overextending empathy?
I don't know if I have found that solution yet, to be honest. I feel like this is free therapy. Thanks, Avani. Thanks everybody for sharing your wisdom. Just that reminder to listen, to breathe, to rest. I honestly struggle with not necessarily empathy, but there was a terminology from psychology that helped me understand something that I was experiencing that I couldn't name. And that was vicarious trauma. And it's well known, especially for social workers. And I think social workers are prepared in their training for maintaining healthy, empathetic boundaries. But in my preparation to be a teacher, I was not. And I kind of stumbled upon nonprofit leadership, literally stumbled upon it, in the sense that I joined Freedom U as a volunteer teacher, and the founding teachers left the organization, and I was the only person left. That is literally how I came to be the executive director at Freedom U. It's not a glorious story, but the bans banning undocumented students from public higher education in Georgia were still in place. The problem was still there, and so I stayed. But in terms of not overextending yourself, I think sometimes nonprofits and movements are seen as two separate things, and sometimes they overlap for better or worse. But I think there's a hybrid, and that's a beloved community in which caring for one another and an ethic of love is at the center of our work and the center of our community. And when COVID hit and the pandemic hit, we had already put in the work and the labor of creating that beloved community. And so when, a new trauma that caused everyone to have to pivot and adjust and adapt, we had already been used to doing that, right? When DACA was repealed, whenever there was a tweet about immigration that would cause trauma and panic in the immigrant community. And so we were able to breathe. And that was actually our mantra, is just, luckily we are in an educational space, and we happened by chance to also have epidemiologists on our faculty from Emory while the pandemic hit. And so we just learned about it, talked about it, what next, right? But because the empathy isn't also from, the teachers to students, it's both ways. And that's what beloved community allows as well, is the teaching is going both ways, the learning is going both ways, and the love and empathy is going both ways. But yeah, I guess my answer to that is I don't know. I'm still struggling with it, because caring you can't turn off at 6 p.m., and so it's something that you carry with you into dinner, into trying to go to sleep and not being able to go to sleep. And as someone who receives that people reach out to with a lot of trauma, asking a lot of help, it's hard not to internalize all of it. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that yet, because I do I don't think you can be overly empathetic, but there has to be ways where you can maintain this work and also make sure that your health is the priority. But honestly, the strongest components of me taking breaks and taking care of myself are my own students. If they see me posting homework at 1 a.m., I get yelled at by my students. And it's like, Emiko, go to sleep, take care of yourself. We're not going to die before tomorrow, right? And again, I think that comes through a loving and beloved community.
Thank you for sharing. I actually just want to pause for a minute to let that sink in. Because this is so important, and I don't think we talk about this enough. We either suffer in silence or we push through. And the truth is, I love this two-way image of supporting each other and disabusing ourselves of traditional roles of hierarchy, dare I say it again, boxes. These are all such powerful reminders to what really creates innovation. You mentioned a word that I have to pick up on, because what was the theme word of 2020? It was pivot. So I'd love to take a few minutes to hear from you all about some of your pivots. And Avani, I want to open with you and ask, I know that you recently spoke with Monica about running a Facebook community group and how, and you posted as well, how this made you think about boundaries. I'm curious if you can share sort of what you learned about boundaries amidst a pivot.
I got such an acute lesson. The gift of COVID for me was as sort of a healer spirit and somebody who literally never hesitates to just quickly start something without thinking. I will just like, let's create a Facebook group. Let's start a WhatsApp circle. Okay, let's start this series of people talking. I'm going to start a podcast. I've done this my whole life. The pivot for me and the boundary for me was taking a beat. And also allowing myself to step out of spaces where I have stepped up in that way. And like a really good example of this, and some of you might know this, is kind of like in March of 2020, not March, May of 2020, I was seeing lots of my friends and people that I know just saying like they're having the pandemic blahs. So, okay, right, great. Sometimes you just need somebody to tell you it's going to be okay. So literally started this Facebook group called A Group of People Telling You It Will Be Okay. And had outlined some of that journey in this podcast episode that Monica has dropped in the chat. And on Mental Health Day, Facebook featured the group in an emotional health unit that went out on Facebook's app. So the group was linked as a place where people could find support. And it went from 750 people of close ties, fairly close ties to me, or one step removed, to over the course of a weekend, 7,500 people who were hurting. Some with, mental health diagnoses, not being able to get the proper support because they couldn't see their caretakers, people needing medication, and people who had joined that community before were like, hey, what is this? The whole vibe has changed, and it felt heavy. And so I was finding myself getting dragged down by this space, and that wasn't the intention. And then at some point in time, for Thanksgiving, I think it ran until then, I said, oh, just put the group on a break. You can do that on Facebook and sort of archive your group so that people can see what's going on if they're members, but there can be no new activity. That was the boundary for me, because I never revived it, and we never started it again because I didn't have it in me. It was a hard year for me, and I think I have a pattern of outsourcing my own healing by helping others. And as that became more and more apparent, because I was by myself for many months in my house in San Francisco, not doing anything or going anywhere. It's one of the lessons that I learned about myself. And so I had to make this choice. And it just really became clear, like, I can't show up for people if I'm not showing up for myself. And I can't help people and then ignore some of these things that I need to really look at in my own life. So that line, once again, the borderland of doing for others versus doing for yourself, I had to step into doing for myself and just like say openly, I can't run this community right now, even with wonderful help that I had from my colleagues stepping up and people wanting to help. I was not the person to be able to soothe the hearts of the people that found that community. And that's okay. Like, I didn't need to show up in that way, and everything would be fine if I did not show up in that way. And I at least I can say, I think if I would have continued, I would have done it with resentment and not with love. And I don't want to show up in spaces if it's not with love. I like that causes more harm, even though the intention is good. So that's kind of my take on it. And I think as I allowed myself to say no and then really like explored the innovation of rest from this space of like quietness, has come so much understanding about myself that I have a lot more information to take into the world and to build with now, because I get myself. And I don't think I really allowed myself to get myself like that before. I just said a whole bunch, Jennifer. So if we need to pause, we can pause.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge all of our panelists. Thank you for modeling vulnerability, because it is so easy to come into a conversation like this with our game faces. Let's inspire everyone by all the amazing things we're doing. And what's more important than getting real and saying, what have we actually struggled with? And what can we share? So I just wanted to honor all of you for really showing up in that light. And again, I think, Monica, it's testament to what you can pull together that does make this different. Wow. I sort of just feel like I should drop the mic now, but I'm still curious. I've got so many questions, even though I know that, wow, we only have 20 minutes left. But Ian, something you said really struck me about how you can bring into your business and your community the values that you think are most important. And we're talking a lot about, the importance of balancing, business/innovation with heart. And I'm curious what you would say to a fellow business owner who says, I get it, I care about these things, but my priority has to be running my business. How do you encourage them to sort of see the world with a wider lens? And what makes how you engage with the community maybe different from some of the other business owners you know?
That's a great question. And I think that I'm really lucky. I think I'm pretty atypical of most business owners in the sense that I'm not as hands-on, and I don't have to be as involved. And I think it's totally okay if other people are not in that position to be able to find time to give back to the community. That being said, there's two reasons why I do it is first of all, it feels great to give back to the community. I think it's just one of the things I enjoy the most. And also, just from even a business level, I learned so much by doing volunteer work about the world, about practicing my leadership skills. I've co-founded the National Asian Chamber of Commerce. We have chapters all over the US with 1,000 members. And that taught me so much about leading leading people in different cities, different cultures. Every city has their different culture. And I've learned so much. And I say it's a luxury. It's a luxury to be able to give back to the community. So those are the reasons why I do it. And the other thing I would say is, I just try to help people manage their businesses in a way that they can set up a culture where they don't have to be so hands-on. and then they can focus on things outside of just the dollars and cents. And that's when you can kind of have the time to do these things. So it's a luxury, and not everybody has it.
I heard two really powerful things in what you said just now, which is not only to create the space to be able to do these things, but something I wanted to reflect back that I heard you say is that it's not simply about looking at it as giving, but it's also looking at it as what you're learning. And I think so many times it's one way, and changing our thinking about that could be a very powerful way to reshape how we engage. And I want to thank you for that. All right, Nish, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask you to bring us back to earth, because as we've heard, a common theme of working to the point of being overextended, needing to learn how to set boundaries, needing to listen to what we need. How do you as an innovator focus on what is most important and not get distracted, even when you're thinking about things in a different way?
Yeah, so Avani has made me a little conscious about me saying I'm an innovator, but I'll just do it. So as an innovator, I create things, and I've been creating. Or how about this? As an engineer, let's say engineer, I've been building and exploring different ideas. But as a business, as an entrepreneur, I have been very focused, laser focused in one particular area. Started with autism, neurodiversity, to ultimately disability and all employment related. So I call this more holistic approach towards tackling. So stick to that. That's always a challenge for person like me. But the beautiful thing and what I've been doing is I have surrounded myself with some amazing people. First is, of course, my wife, Hetal, and some of the other amazing advisors, friends, and family. They keep me on track, because as a engineer, as a builder, as a maker, it's very difficult for me to cut, because it's like almost like cutting my finger if I build something. So I've been doing that for last 15 years. And three projects came to my mind. One of the project was is teaching children with autism, which we've been doing, and we pivoted to and then into employment space. So as long as that pivot is helping us with the learning, and then just within the range, we want to make sure. So I will give you one example. Our recent pivot as an innovator, or for innovative solution. During COVID, we just changed our solution from hiring people on site for our customers to completely off site. So a lot of pivoting has been driven by circumstances, sometimes the situation like COVID, sometimes financial conditions, and sometimes too early in the space of innovation. So as we all know, innovation to the success can take from 8 to 30 years. And it takes time, it takes nurturing. I built something in 1998, which was very similar to Grubhub for delivery of food. That time I used the technology, facts-based technology. It was too early. I was not able to sustain. So some of those factors are key.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to pause with a quick side note here, because I feel like I found my people. I think, like all of you, I had a sort of different experience growing up. So my mother is Chinese American. My father is of English and Native American descent. And I actually grew up in Asia as an American expat. So my identity was very confused and very confusing. And even more so because my father spoke Chinese fluently and my mother spoke English fluently. So I didn't even have two parts of my identities in different boxes. And my parents got married in Japan. So I am very confused. And like what I heard here, it's that rare feeling when it's like I'm in a room of people who are so different from me and at the same time so much like me. And I just wanted to pause and acknowledge that and thank you all for sharing your wisdom and your stories, and again to modeling this vulnerability that being an impactful innovator is not about highlighting a list of accomplishments, because that's implicit in what you do. And thank you so much for that. So I just want to quickly check in with Monica and see if there's anything you wanted to share at this point, or any questions that have come up before I sort of go to the lightning round conclusion.
No, well, I'll just say to piggyback, Jennifer, on your last comment, that I think it's so beautiful that even though some of us are here, maybe you came for the innovation hack, this is your hack. You're not supposed to lead innovation with just your head. You're supposed to lead it with your heart. And everything that you heard, I think sometimes, I think the number one thing that I often come across as innovators, and when I coach and empower innovators and community building, is that many share that, well, I want to figure out what's the right tool, what's the right framework, or like what's the fastest way to get something. And I think they might hear these advices, and I think often what we hear is that, okay, yeah, that value thing, I know it's important, I'm doing it, but in earnesty, as they're expressing and sharing, we talk about vulnerability and, really leading from heart. It's a lot harder than we think. And I think what I hope you're all hearing as you're listening is that, one, a reminder that I hope not only does it inspire, but a reminder that if this feels hard, that's just being true. So let's not beat around the bushes. Let's not give ourselves a hard time. I think at times our perfection of wanting to think of like, hey, how do we get this perfectly? I want to figure out how to get this right, prevents us from celebrating the journey in itself. I just want to thank again every single one of you for highlighting that truth by sharing that. And again, Jennifer, as you pointed out correctly, that it's not about the milestones. You can read all their bios. They have amazing milestones. They're doing so much and many more, but that's not the only reason why. It's so much more than that, because this is actually what makes lasting innovation. And so very humbled and grateful and appreciating every single one being here as well. But I know there's more advice that we can hear, Jennifer, and I know there's a question that you wanted to go on.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat from Rashonda for Nish. How do you use empathy to drive innovation? I love that question. I can't wait to hear the answer.
Yeah, so that's Rangam's tagline is empathy drives innovation. And, as a workforce solution company, we are working, or we are a connector between job seekers and employers, right? And as a connector, that feeling, that pain, and some of the challenges faced by employers and some of the challenges faced by our candidates, that empathetic approach, which really makes us feel that pain, would help us put ourselves in their shoe and feel that pain. And that is the most powerful part when it comes to innovation. So innovation, we talk about innovation starting with looking and understanding, these two components of innovation, which is driven by empathy. Now, if you have that empathy, when you take the empathetic approach, you are 66% successful. Then the last component, which is really trying it out, getting that buy-in from the stakeholders. And that is, again, that has empathetic approach where we are listening, constantly listening and tweaking it till we make it work. So empathy is really driving the innovation. That's what I personally believe.
I think a light bulb just went off in my head. Like, we are so often thinking about the solution itself and not the solution for the sake of what. And that is such a powerful reminder. We have an open question from Stacy. Is anyone into yoga, meditation, modulated breathing practices, or know anything about yoga therapy? And if so, how do these practices help with innovation? I'm curious. I'll throw this out into the open and see if anyone wants to grab that question.
I have a take on this. I think those practices help us connect to our own voice and ourself. And, our innate wisdom is innovating all the time, is answering questions about the world all the time, but it's really rare that we have spaces that are silent enough for those thoughts, those insights to really bubble through. And I think that those practices can certainly help in creating those spaces of reverence and silence in order to be able to hear that and then to apply that to the world. And then, like Monica said, it's an iterative process. You know, you allow your little voice to speak by practicing yoga or meditation or deep breathing, and then you take it as a hypothesis and apply it to the world, whatever you hear. And it's helpful. It's been incredibly helpful for me, Stacey, just in making sure, one, that I'm giving my body this essential oxygen, two, giving myself the space and time for things to bubble up without distracting myself, and three, acknowledging the beauty of my own wisdom, because like the biggest form of self-betrayal that we can have is not listening to ourselves. Crone wisdom hashtag, but it's been a big lesson for me. And so I'm sure there's some other practitioners amongst our midst. And I think probably, like, I know a few of the people on this panel, each one of us have our way of manifesting this. Dance, singing, you know, there's just so many different ways. Monica just constantly brings fabulous people together and does her silence and reverence offers that. So I think there's a number of ways, but like silence can give way to knowing how to direct the energy that we do have.
Wow. And Ian, I think I saw your mic go on, and I wanted to ask if you had anything to add to that, because I'm blown away.
Yeah, I love meditating. I actually was diagnosed with ADD when I was a kid, and my mom was like, they're going to put me on Ritalin, but my mom was like, no, you know, I think it's something that makes him. This is ADD. And yeah, I think it's just a classification, but meditation really helps me slow down and be in the moment. I meditate 4 to 5 times a week, and particularly with social media and everything going virtual, I have to admit, like, I'm very competitive, and I'm like, you know, the overnight success, like, I feel like I got to be an overnight success. And when you go on social media, everybody seems like they're overnight success. They're doing great things, going to cool places, you know, have all these followers and all this, but it makes me feel rushed in what I need to accomplish. But, you know, especially during the pandemic, the meditation has really helped me kind of block that out and be like, you are who you are. You're going to do what you can accomplish and contribute to the world. So, you know, that's how meditation has really helped me lately.
I just wanted to thank you both for like noting the difference between big M meditation, which is the meditation practice, and small M meditation, which is just noticing how you're thinking and talking to yourself, because that is transformational. We have a question from Ellen. How should we deal with unpleasant situations being surrounded by a group of people who are not inclusive as you expected? How can we break this momentum and be vocal and bring innovative ideas to the group? Or if we're an observer, what can we do to break this momentum? As originally, anyone can jump in. Emiko, I'm curious if you have a perspective on this that you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I am a professional at dealing with unpleasant situations, and also, aggressive people, or been Zoom bombed many times and targeted. Definitely had right-wing campus groups come to harass myself or students. So I'm pretty used to this. I think humor is really helpful. I think I'm going to connect this to the last question. Meditation has really helped me see emotions and situations as things that come and go, right? Rather than internalizing it, making it personal, that oftentimes unpleasant people, unpleasant ideas, cruel words and actions are a reflection of that person that also deserves empathy, right? Rather than it being some accusation of who I am, right? It's Avani's right. It's not about you. And I think meditation has allowed me to look at those situations with curiosity and with some humor. So it's gotten to a point where if there's a heckler in the audience and they ask a terrible question, the students giggle and they kind of laugh and they're like, Emiko, you want to take it? Because it's funny for them, but like I usually treat it with humor, reflect a question back at them, or come in with a lot of knowledge and facts. And so I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I think part of how I deal with those unpleasant situations is just, again, recognizing that they're often reflections of that person. But I want to talk about, if it's about, you asked about diversity or not inclusive, right? I think oftentimes people are scared of or feel threatened by difference. And I want to bring in, if I can dork out just a little bit, I actually studied interracial labor movements. That's my jam. And actually digging in to archives and research and working with an interracial migrant farm worker movement, it's fascinating how, when there's so many factors that are trying to divide people, especially when it comes to labor and collective power, how do interracial movements come together? And when you actually are partaking in it, or when you're looking at successful interracial labor movements in the past, you would assume it's because people were able to push away their differences and recognize some shared, workers' desire or rights. But oftentimes they heightened their language of difference or made it humorous, right? The farm worker movement in Hawaii in the 1950s, Portuguese, Chinese, Japanese workers, they're being pit against each other. And if you actually look at what they were saying with one another, the workers would say, like the Hawaiian workers would say, we're all like mochi, right? The delicious Japanese rice cakes, in respects to their Japanese counterparts, and said, we're like mochi. The more the bosses pound us, the more we stick together, right? And so like they would use these cultural ideas from people who are different from them and heighten those differences using humor, and not being scared of those differences. And just because we're different doesn't mean that we can't work together, that we can't be friends, or that we can't love one another. And at Freedom U, with all of these differences, all the differences in terms of race and age, different types of undocumented people, asylum seekers, DACA, fully undocumented, U visa holders, it's extremely diverse, citizens, green card holders, residents, all of us are all in the same space. And it's not being scared of our differences, but actually, like Avani was saying, it's just like, that we can take all of these things and allow us to just actually bring more to the table. We can learn from people more and more instead of being defensive. But I think, even in this conversation, people being vulnerable and you putting down your guard, oftentimes you need to be the first person to do that. And that's hard. But when I put my guard down, oftentimes people in uncomfortable situation also realize it's safe to put their guard down too. And that takes a lot of courage.
Wow, what a powerful reminder. Now, I know we're at time. May I pull moderator's privilege and ask for 5 more minutes so I can ask Nathan's wonderful question? Okay, thank you. So Nathan's asking, what about when it's working together in an organization where diplomacy is difficult to balance with the courage to voice your truth? I'm curious if any of our panelists have a thought about that.
I'll do a quick take on this. I work for a mega corporation that has been maligned in the news recently for good reasons. And one of my colleagues is in this conversation too. Our approach to this, and when I say this, I will specifically call out the conversations about racial justice and equity across Facebook's platforms, how we treat community partners, how they're represented in the work that we do, the communities that we serve, and just representation overall, from our team to the way the company even thinks about building products. previous to working for this company, I saw it as the evil empire. Being inside, I can see that there is a dedicated, literally a movement of people that has been pushing for change for a really long time. And I hope to count myself amongst those people in the legacy of the company. But what's been helpful for me was to bring it back to the way that I was talking about the light, Nathan. Like, what I specifically meant was, I find the bright spots. So, you know, even Ellen, when you were talking about a group of people where there is no momentum and people seem to be stuck, if you can get people individually and then show that vulnerability with them, which Emiko talked about, you can usually break into one or two people, and then you have the starts of a movement and some momentum around change. And you can make it possible for them to also shine in the way that they want to. And Nathan, that's how this work was done at Facebook. People have been advocating for this change for a decade, and there's enough of us and there's momentum around it to where the company is actually starting to take some action, and we can do more. But it started a long time ago, and I think, like, everything that everyone is saying about trying to find that balance for yourself when you know it's a long fight, you get to be really strategic about how you use shine theory, where you back each other up, where you are developing strategies to give to your leadership. Like, leadership shows up in really interesting ways and not in the ways that we think about traditionally. There is a strong crew of people in the background helping everything that's going on like on stage, and we are slowly starting to band together in this organization and outside of the organization. And I treat my partners that I work with communities. So I'm like a coach for community leaders that build their communities on Facebook. I treat my partners in the same way. There's that same level of vulnerability, and it has served me well in this moment, being a part of an organization undergoing a heck of a lot of change. Hopefully this is helpful.
Thank you so much. The last thing that I wanted to ask of all of you before we wrap up today is, could you give one word of advice about what you want any entrepreneur, or innovator listening to this to take to heart? One word. Can I challenge all of you to do that? Starting with Nish, then Ian, then Avani, and then Emiko.
Be persistent. Don't give up.
Humility.
I think I would say connection.
Take your time. The 30 under 30 lists are trash. That's my one word.
Monica, over to you.
I had to literally laugh out loud. Yes, aiming for 100, under 100. Thank you all so much. Really. I think one of the things that we strive to do at InnovatorsBox in the spaces that we create is that we want to invite different conversations, because I feel as I innovate, as I, and especially for this one, this was especially personal because as you see, I am Asian American. And I got used to being in rooms that I was the only one who looked like me. So I kind of forgot what it was like to care. I forgot what it meant to really take the time to connect with others who also have realized, gone through it. And I hope that whether, again, part of the intention of us celebrating these different voices, but positioning with the language choice of innovators who happen to be Asian American, is a true celebration of, I think, yes, identities influence us, but there's so much lesson that goes beyond that to one space and one aspect. And I'm so grateful that, again, the theme that I'm going to walk away is, at times, I think being Asian American means we have to worry about some of these milestones and, accomplishments, comparison. But I really appreciate each one of you reminding us that that's not really what it is. Emiko, you hit the nail at the end again. Like, who says it has to be 30? I know media does, but that's not where life is. We have life to live. And, I think each and every single one of you, not just our speakers, but all of you who's listening here, both taking notes, you're really taking the time to digest. And I hope if this could help you walk away with not only more courage, but at least 1 or 2 new action steps, maybe at different conversations we're going to have, I would say we've accomplished our goal. And I hope that you can be that catalyst for somebody else. Maybe somebody needs that reminder, and that reminder that maybe, hey, it's okay. And so thank you so much. Thank you, Avani, Nish, Ian, Emiko, Jennifer, for the wonderful moderation. Could we give a round of apologies? And thank you all very, very much. Again, we'll be back again with another one, but coincidentally, you might have noticed to celebrate LGBTQ voices, we are not doing Pride Month because I know next month is crowded. We're actually doing this in October because LGBTQ History Month is actually in October. And so while we will celebrate all different voices of innovators, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we welcome you again. Please come back. Again, this is only the way that we're able to cross collaborate. And again, thank you, Jennifer, for the thoughtful moderation. And so I'll take a few minutes to hang out for those who might want to chat or if there's any other side questions, but thank you so much. And again, wishing you a wonderful May, Asian American Pacific Island Heritage Month. And Jennifer, any final thoughts before we end?
Just thank you.
So with that, thank you all very much, and we'll see you later again. Thank you.